It's a delight to have you both here. Amy Franceschini, who is an artist and designer and founder of Futurefarmers in the 1990s, 1995 maybe, for some time. Wonderful, wonderful program. Lode Vranken is lead architect and philosopher at Futurefarmers, which is an interesting title that you don't often find in a design and artistic practice. So really nice to have you both here. And just to kind of give a summary of what we're going to talk about today, we're exploring the 250 things that an architect should know. It's an essay by Michael Sorkin, by the late Michael Sorkin. And we're taking one of those items, which is item number 152, which states the effect of design of your city on food miles for fresh produce. So looking at through the lens of fresh produce, and what immediately comes to mind often is this notion of food miles, which calls into question the relationship with local architecture. But it also makes us wonder, it's not just about how far, but is there a different relationship to food perhaps? And I think that's where your project that you've been working on, which is maybe a decade-long project now, the Flatbread Society. And as I understand it, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, that it started as a public art project to kind of instigate, maybe run a regeneration of a container port on the Oslo waterfront. And I believe this started with the relationship of grain somewhere around 2010 or 2011. And I really love that it brings together farmers, astronomers, soil scientists, bakers. So I guess the question would be really, what was the connection to growing and to ancient grains that you were interested in exploring? What's the impetus behind this project?
No.
Yeah.
Of what? The connection of?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, what's the connection to growing and ancient grains that you're interested in exploring with this project? What was the impetus behind the Flatbread Society, and in particular, the connection to growing?
You can shoot.
Okay, I start and then maybe Lode jumps in. So the interest in grains came from the fact that the site we were asked to work in one of the common areas within this new development. So they had, in Norway, the idea of commons is quite strong. It's part of their constitution, very different than the United States. And so we chose this common area near the waterfront, but we were trying to find some sort of way to connect to the different communities in Oslo. So there's a very diverse, it's one of the more diverse cities in Scandinavia. And one thing that was held in common was flatbread. So Norwegian nationals are eating flatbread every morning. And then there's Pakistani communities and Iranian communities, Somalian communities also eating flatbread. So we thought that that would be this kind of currency that we could use throughout the imaginary and practical aspects of bringing people together. And so we wanted to grow grains on this site to actually, manifest the material of bread. And we thought it was very important to use seeds that were not certified yet, that were outside of the industrialized certification process. And we found a farmer very nearby who had gotten these ancient grains, especially this rye grain, back into production that hadn't been in production for almost 100 years. And so the symbol of these grains that are sitting outside of the industrial agricultural complex, for us were a really strong symbol of the commons, and that this matter should remain in the hands of many, not in the hands of few, and that to start this project with a field of these ancient grains that had been found in Norway would be a strong symbol of that. And also a kind of, looking at this is not a cornfield project, or this is not a wheat field, or no, this is not a wheat field was in Los Angeles, but I'm blanking on her name, the great artist in New York who planted the wheat field.
Oh, yes. I know who you're talking about. I'm not
Sorry,
thinking of her
friend.
name.
But just to think of the contrast of this city that was developing really fast with this image of a grain field seemed like a great starting point. I mean, there's many layers to the project, but that was a beginning point to establish kind of an image. And then we created this working group called Flatbread Society as a way to kind of, establish a community or a society.
Yeah, it starts with a community in a sense, which is interesting.
I don't know if it started with a community.
No.
There was nobody there.
Right.
No, it was the beauty of emptiness that was present there, ready to have all possible possibilities. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't even have soil, so we didn't even have a microbial community.
Right.
It was, stone. No one had lived there before, so we weren't dealing with a lot of issues that happen in public space where it's being gentrified, people have been displaced. It was a fallow port for 20 years.
Just ship containers on there. That's it. Shipping containers, cargo kind of situation.
Not even
developing building site. Developing building site. It was not really a building site yet, but at the moment it was empty. The port was gone. The former farm of the king was gone. The shipyard was gone. It was empty, ready to be, changed.
So Amy, you mentioned that there was not even soil there, and there's a video that happens a little bit later on, maybe a few years later, a procession of farmers carrying soil to Oslo. And I really love that there was a declaration of land use as part of this procession, if you will. So did that soil procession connect to the Flatbread Society, or was it a separate project? And what was its role in creating this Flatbread Society, or the bakehouse even? What was the role of the soil procession?
Well, I think it started earlier. In the beginning, we had this shed. It was the first bakehouse we built with 3 ovens to make it was a dome oven, a take, which is a traditional Norwegian oven. It's a stove more, and a tandoor to make more Middle East kind of bread. So different kinds of flatbread. There was one place, and there was another thing. There was a walking boat that was wandering around in the city with an oven making flatbread. And so people got interested. People came because of the boat wandering around. People came to the site, saw this oven, joined in things that were programmed. There was a programming and time of programming going on for a month, I think. But then people also started to gather and to say, can we organize something about fermentation, about, there was a design group, and people, the university came and things like that. And so people started following the program, started to make their own program. And that is where the first sort of community started to happen. But then with the soul procession, I think other communities were at. Also, the first time the beekeepers came, and then the bees came, and then all the grains came and things like that. So there was a sort of community going on. But then the soul procession, there was a next level or extension to this, or to grow or cultivate this community.
I mean, from that first bakehouse, there was a strong enough desire by locals to want to continue this, and we got permission to do a community farm, but we had no soil. And instead of bringing in soil that the university offered to give us clean soil, and we thought that would be too easy in a way. it would be great if we could kind of animate all the peri-urban farmers to bring their soil in and to highlight their practice that they are feeding the city, and also to not. I think urban farming can offset food production, but I don't think I don't think urban farms are going to feed cities yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to also, make that part of the conversation, that we need these peri-urban farmers. They're knowledgeable. They have a practice that's valid. So how do we create this site as a stage for all kinds of farmers?
Mm-hmm.
And so we made handwritten postcards and sent them out to 50 or 60 farmers and asked if they would come on this day to the edge of the city with a symbolic amount of soil and march through the city to the site and lay out their soil on the site. And 52 people responded, and we met at the edge of the city and we did this procession. And in the days before, we started to think about, okay, this is real. 52 farmers are coming. We have to really pay homage and honor their practice. We're also going to have the Minister of Culture coming and the Minister of Agriculture and some important people. Let's establish this place as a kind of museum without walls, a space that is a cultural institution dedicated to art and agriculture, because in this waterfront, a lot of the cultural institutions were moving from the city to the waterfront. So there was the opera, the Munch Museum, the library, and now there's the space called Lode Vranken, our space. And so the farmers came together and we asked all the people in the procession to take a handful of each farmer's soil and mix it together into this new culture, which we then laid out on the ground. We named the site Lode Vranken, which means a common in the city. Everybody signed this document, the farmers, the cultural ministers, and it felt like this was a moment of co-authorship of this space, and that we were just making manifest what was kind of already there, as Lode would say. Yeah. Do you want to say anything else about soil procession?
That's quite clear.
It's interesting in the sense that it's bringing community together in farmers don't often get asked to participate in a public art project. And yet this is very much about the connection of the farm and the city, in a sense. So the urban and the rural coming together. And it's a beautiful way that you've actually instigated that. I wonder if we could talk a bit more about the bakehouse. And Lode, you mentioned a little bit about the temporary bakehouse, which it's an interesting juxtaposition. We've talked a bit about the site already and how all the museums were moving in, and the opera and ballet building in particular is quite well known, designed by Snohetta, and I believe the roof is quite actively used, so it's a fairly prominent building. But in the middle of all of this growing architecture is it's a trapezoid of 2x4s maybe, and a structure that doesn't really have walls, and it's very temporary. What was the impetus behind that? What were you interested in doing in the creation of that structure, that first structure, and then what came from that into the more formal structure that you've developed? A bit of the behind the scenes on what you were thinking with the design of the structure, both the first one and the second one.
Well,
if you would.
I think it's a sort of action to explore what is there and who is there, and it was definitely the combination of this bakehouse and this wandering walking boat that made a sort of the possibility to have a center without walls that is also a magnet, but also to have a sort of walking center that surprises people when it walks by or it stops or whatever, and that attracts people, and sort of because of the weirdness, sort of tries to awaken the curiosity of people, and in this weirdness bring them together and make them join you in whatever you don't know you're going. Since
There's a
I think
surprise when a boat comes walking by you, right?
And starts baking.
So in that way, it's a sort of a, if you, I don't know, it's needed to talk about architecture, but if you want to talk about architecture, it's sort of a rhizomatic architecture that has no walls, but only a center that works like an attraction. And so you don't make community in a room where you gather, but you make it as a sort of thing that glues, I don't know, what is coming there together, and at the same time then moves away to other places. Some people move, and so you start to make a sort of rhizomatic structure that is the basis of a community that is not based on specific places or specific program, but more about the wandering around and see what happens, and trying to find out what is manifest and invisible, and make the thing that is invisible visible or manifest. So that's one thing, but then at the same time the programming was going on under the roof of the near the oven we built. And so these two together made this brought this community as a mixture of all kinds of people from all kinds of places and ideas, and so brought them together to make this community, I think. And then you see what happens. Then we did, I think it was the last programming we did. It was called the
Form and function?
Yeah, form and function. So how do you think this community, so you sort of create a community and it happens, and then what is this community, how does this community functions, and what kind of social structure comes with this community, which is typical for that community that just arose. And then within this social structure, what kind of form, physical form, does that need? And so there was a workshop we did on how does this new bakehouse, the permanent bakehouse, because we were allowed later, they said like, oh, this is too beautiful, and we got support of the community, the government,
the city.
So suddenly the temporary bakehouse could become a permanent bakehouse. So this, in fact, this temporary or new common or community could become a permanent community. So how does this permanent community needs to organize itself, and then what kind of form do you need? And that was a sort of this idea in the workshop, form and function, and there was something else.
It was form and function and alternative economies. Like how can we, because the site is, as a commons, could not host any businesses, and so many people in the first bakehouse were like, can I work here? Can I start a business here? Can I sell flatbread? Can I do fermentation workshops for money? And we're like, we need to find an alternative economy, and that was really interesting. We brought bankers there and librarians and young school educators to talk about different modes of exchange that could happen on the site. And there were also, we actually had people mold their ideas of a permanent bakehouse and bake them in the oven, and then we talked about them. We had this table that was a continuum that they could lay them on, and at one end was completely open, everybody has keys, and at the other was closed, only one key holder, to think about how do you have access to this site, how does the form lend itself to that.
There's also, of course, the idea of the community, is that an open community or becomes our community and the rest is outsiders, or how do you keep this community open? And so that was taught in these baked models, dingen. There was different kinds, like solid structures or balls that wander around. Yeah, there was nice bakings.
It's really interesting to hear how you've taken something that's a simple structure, I mean, not a simple structure, but a bakehouse is something that has allowed all of this engagement, all this exploration around economies, political, power structures and power dynamics, all of these things that make community exist is explored within the realm of a place where you bake bread. That's really beautiful. And I'd love to ask kind of a follow-up question, which is around, we've been talking about community, and you'd mentioned that there were different kinds of flatbreads because it's a very diverse city, and there were all kinds of, there's from Eritrea, Afghanistan, whatever, all of these different types of breads. And I found a quote, Amy, that you had said that's the bakehouse is not where communities meet, but where difference can meet. And I'm very interested, that was Lode?
I don't remember.
That concept is very interesting because we don't often think about how difference comes together. We think of community as homogenous. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that if possible.
I think it's a combination of sort of having a program and going for your program, but at the same time, especially losing your program. And that's why I go back to the walking structure in the city. It is a weird thing where you more or less lose it. Like, what is this? It's not like, oh, I joined this because I have the same ideology, or I have the same ideas, or I have the same revolution going on. I think it's not like that. It's a boat that walks by and is baking bread. So you sort of steps in something you don't know, and you lose it a little bit. And there is, I think, an openness for coming together and have a small moment of pushing aside your beliefs, your convictions, your political interest and things like that. At the moment, it's gone. And so at the moment, you can talk openly. And so at the moment, in a short moment, you can maybe become friends or community or whatever. And if that lasts, you get this difference that is going on. If that lasts, you get this difference that is get established. And so when we baked these different models, it was also trying to find out how can you keep this sphere of openness, because soon you become a group, you become friends, and those are the good ones and those are the bad ones, or those are the insiders and those are the outsiders, and then someone wants to join, but that doesn't really fit and things like that. And so it becomes a little bit problematic. Well, it happens like that, of course, but it's trying to find a way to create openness in thought and I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's something about the site really has no leader. There is, we were fortunate to be able to hire a full-time farmer who is, I would say, kind of the pillar, but in a way it's too much work for one person. And there's been this way that different projects have rooted themselves at the site. And so there are different things going on. There's different Facebook pages for each group. There's hidden communities that said, oh, it got too popular there, so we made our little subgroup at the site. We meet secretly. But there's some strange balance with the place kind of having a life of its own that can't really be named or controlled, that allows a lot of different types of projects and people to be there. And it's still a strange place. It's still, it's like in the middle of these freeways. There's these towers coming out of the center, which are exhaust towers for the freeway. It's at the water. So when people come there for the first time, they're really like, how did this happen? How did I end up here? and I think when people enter a place where a question like that begins, then there's an openness. I hope we can do that in future projects to keep the surprise. Always surprising people and ourselves.
We had time.
We had a lot of time in that project.
Yeah, it was about a decade. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask one last question, which, Lode, I noticed that you had studied, your master's was through a UN course on human settlements and architecture and philosophy. And I'm curious about if there's a connection with the UN Global Report on Human Settlements that came out, where there was a discussion of planning must change, we need to adapt. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on how this is going to feel like a really heavy, large, big question. And I'm sorry, I don't mean it to be that way. But I'm curious to know what your thinking is on what the relationship is with the work of the Flatbread Society and the future of what we should be doing. What should we be doing with our communities? How should we be thinking about urbanism and urban planning differently? And does this shine a light in any way from your view?
Well, that was a long time ago. That was in '93 I did human settlements. I think a lot has changed because
For sure. Yeah.
a lot has changed about the ideas of things. But I think I like to speak about the Flatbread Society as an exercise, a small, maybe utopic exercise in the reverse planning. Because normally you have the great lines, like what should the region be? There is this industrial, there is agriculture, there is the city has suburbs, and blah, 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 the great lines, and then you have more specific regulations of the city about urban planning and things like that, like the slope of your roof, for example, here in Belgium, or the windows, the material use, the colors even, I don't know. And then you have the architect who knows everything, comes to the people, and then you say, I would like to have a house, blah, blah, blah. And the architect's like, I know what you need. So then the architect makes the design, trying to understand what you need, if he does that. And then in the end, you have to live in it. So and what we tried to do there was first start to gather these people, let them come together and see what happens. And then out of that, how does that function? How should that function? And how should that thing? And so what we did was, in the end, we were not allowed to build there. So we had to change sort of building regulations to allow that, to do that. And in the end, it becomes a sort of an example of how things could happen. So you really work in changing habits and regulations. Although that's not the aim, or maybe it is, but yeah, and it starts from the idea, start with your community first, because they know, that maybe they don't know, but they organize themselves in a special way, and it's from that you have to start, and not from the opposite thing. And of course you can do your research as an architect and things like that, but I think it's more interesting not to do your research and then build something for the community that is coming, but first build your community and then see what happens. So maybe it's an impossible strategy, although something is happening. That's going away.
Oh, it's going away. There was a picture on Lotus screen of the early days of Flatbread Society. That was perfect. Just these mounds of cement and some grain, and yeah.
But if it's just an art project or just an idea that we tried there, it was more than an idea. Still, maybe it can contaminate something and make people think about how urban planning should change. Or can change, not should change, but can change. So yeah, there is maybe something interesting there.
That's a nice concept to think about. And Amy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add. I didn't mean to jump in.
No. I think it's, I mean, I don't know anything about urban planning really formally, but I think within Bjørvika was the name of this redevelopment area. And I think it was maybe bigger and more ambitious than they thought. And I think we kind of inserted ourselves into a little area that they didn't really know, like, oh, that's going to happen in 20 years. But I think maybe it's interesting for development projects to leave space for the unknown, or to leave a space that people can try things out before they make the master plans even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we were inside of a master plan, and we even asked, can we not meet around these 3D models of the future? Can we meet in the site itself with the people who are going to be there?
Right.
And they said, oh, that's messy, and that's going to take longer. We're like, well, we're okay with that. We have time. But it's, I think it takes a particular situation to have the openness to an organic process and something that doesn't really make sense, and that can be a staging area for new ideas.
Yeah. Well, and to give the space for it to evolve and to iterate on its own with the people and with the community that comes together as they so choose. You're right, it's very messy. And yet what comes out of it is so beautiful and resonates with people in a very different way than something that was planned from a 3D model for a vision for the future might have been able to achieve.
Yeah, and I think every sort of planning, and of course you need planning, but still every sort of planning starts with an ideology, with a concept, how the world should be. And I don't say that those concepts are always bad. There are bad concepts, but there are also good concepts. But you think the world, and then you implement that in your architecture or something. Well, there should be a start of thinking about an inverse way of doing that, so that you change your social interaction, and out of that you build your environment, or the place you live in. It's sort of a discussion between Hegel and Marx, something going on, and one is turning the one on top of it. So that is, I think, what is happening. I think the both are going together. You can't live without planning, but still we have enough planning. So maybe we can focus on the inverse thing, like how can we see how we can change and rethink social interaction. And that is not only humans, because the site is full of other stuff, plants, bees, I don't know what. And then let out of that grow the formal result of your interaction.
Yeah. This has been a really enchanting conversation. And when we thought we were going to talk about food miles on fresh produce, we did actually talk about it in a very interesting way, because I think we were able to bring not only the idea of reverse planning and not doing a premeditated activity, but also the idea of the connection between people and the food that's grown, the food that's baked, all of those things. It's about the people that live there and the intermingling and the mix of the communities and the difference, as you pointed out when describing the community aspects. So I think this has been really wonderful. And if we wanted to think about the antithesis to industrial food production, this definitely points away from the industrial food production that we rely on. It's not just about measuring distance of transportation miles that food is on a truck, but there are other things that are involved. So I want to thank you both for this. I don't know if you have any last words, but no.
I thank you for having such good questions and picking up on things as we went along.